I'm Sophia Martinez, 27, and for as long as I can remember, my dad told me my singing was worse than nails on a chalkboard. He was a decorated military man who had no patience for artistic dreams. But last month, when I performed at a high-profile military benefit, my song made the highest-ranking general in the room go pale and rush out. What I didn't know was that my lyrics would unearth a buried military secret that would finally help me understand why my father had tried so hard to silence my voice. If you're watching this video, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like mine, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how a simple song changed everything. Growing up as a military brat wasn't easy. Our house ran with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Beds were made with corners tight enough to bounce a quarter off, and tardiness was considered a personal failure. My father, Major James Martinez, was a decorated Army officer who believed discipline was the foundation of character. When he was home, which wasn't often, his commanding presence filled every room. His boots always shined, his uniform always pressed, and his expectations always impossibly high. My mother, Diana, was the warm counterbalance to his strictness. She moved through our house like a gentle breeze, smoothing over the rough edges my father left behind. She never directly challenged him, but found small ways to soften his rigid rules when he deployed. Those deployments were frequent: Iraq, Afghanistan, classified locations she couldn't even tell me about. During those months, our home felt lighter, like we could finally exhale. I was 7 when music first found me. My grandmother visited for Christmas and brought me a secondhand guitar she'd found at a yard sale. It was worn around the edges with a small chip on the headstock, but to me, it might as well have been made of gold. "Your grandfather used to play," she told me, her eyes misting over. "He had the most beautiful singing voice. I think you might have inherited it." I spent hours in my room, fingers fumbling over the strings, teaching myself chords from a tattered beginner's book. Something about the vibration of the strings against my fingertips made me feel connected to something larger than myself. When I first started singing along to my clumsy playing, it felt like discovering a secret room in a house I'd lived in my whole life. When my father returned from his deployment 3 months later, he was not impressed by my new hobby. "What is that racket?" he demanded, standing in my doorway with his duffel still in hand, not even home for 5 minutes. "I'm practicing, Dad," I said, my voice small. "Grandma gave me a guitar." He frowned, lines deepening around his mouth. "Sounds like you're strangling a cat. Keep it down. I need to sleep." That was the beginning of a pattern. When he was home, I learned to play only when he wasn't around. When he deployed again, my mother encouraged me. "Don't mind your father," she said one night, sitting on the edge of my bed. "He just doesn't understand music." His father was the same way. In 4th grade, my music teacher, Mrs. Wilson, noticed I had a good ear. She gave me extra sheet music and let me stay after school to practice on the piano. When the elementary school talent show came around, I decided to perform. My mother sat in the front row, beaming and recording everything on our bulky video camera. My father was in South Korea. I sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" while playing the simple chords I'd practiced for weeks. When I finished, the gymnasium erupted in applause. Mrs. Wilson hugged me afterward and told me I had a gift. I showed my father the video when he returned. He watched for 30 seconds before handing the camera back. "That's nice, Sophia, but you should focus more on your math scores. Music won't get you anywhere in life." I was 12 when I wrote my first real song. It was simple, just a few chords and lyrics about waiting for someone to come home. I'd been keeping a journal of how I felt during my father's deployments, and the words poured out easily. My mother cried when I played it for her. "Your father should hear this," she said. But when I played it for him during his 2-week leave, he just nodded and asked if I'd finished my homework. The divide between us grew wider with each passing year. He couldn't understand why I'd rather spend hours practicing than joining the youth running club he suggested. I couldn't understand why he couldn't hear what was in my heart when I sang. In 7th grade, I met Ms. Reynolds, the middle school choir director who would change my life. After hearing me sing during music class, she asked me to stay behind. "Sophia, "You have something special," she said, her hands folded on her desk. "A natural talent that can't be taught. Have you considered joining the choir?" When I explained my father's attitude, she nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand. Music speaks a language not everyone is fluent in. But don't let that stop you from developing your voice." Ms. Reynolds became my champion. She gave me private vocal lessons during lunch breaks and introduced me to different musical styles. Under her guidance, my confidence grew. She even helped me record a few of my songs on the school's equipment. "Your voice tells stories," she told me. "That's rare, especially in someone so young." When I brought home my first A in choir instead of the straight A's in math and science my father expected, the tension at dinner was thick enough to cut with a knife. "What exactly do you think you'll do with a choir grade?" my father asked, not looking up from his plate. "I just enjoy it," I answered quietly. "Enjoyment doesn't pay bills, Sophia. The real world isn't about following every whim that makes you happy." My mother reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Later that night, I heard them arguing in low voices. My name came up several times, along with phrases like "let her be a kid" and "need structure." I retreated to my room and wrote another song. This one was angrier, with minor chords and lyrics about being unheard. I sang it quietly into my pillow, afraid to let the sound travel down the hallway. By the time I turned 13, music had become my refuge. When my father was deployed, our house became a concert hall. My mother would sit on the couch while I performed the new songs I'd written. Sometimes she'd cry, sometimes she'd laugh, but she always listened. In those moments, I felt truly seen. But those moments always ended when my father returned, and the guitar would go back under my bed, my voice would drop to a whisper, and the house would return to its military precision. The contrast was becoming harder to bear, and I began to resent the sound of his boots on the front porch, signaling the end of my freedom. High school brought new opportunities and intensified conflicts. At 15, I was developing my own musical identity, gravitating toward indie folk with influences of jazz. My voice had matured, and years of practice had made me one of the strongest singers in my grade. When auditions for the prestigious high school choir came around, Ms. Reynolds, who had followed me to high school, encouraged me to try out. "The director, Mr. Alvarez, has connections to several music schools," she told me. "This could open doors for you, Sophia." I made the cut, one of only 3 sophomores to do so. When I brought home the acceptance letter, my mother hugged me tight. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. My father, home between deployments, had a different reaction. "Choir practice 3 days a week. That's going to cut into your study time," he said, frowning at the schedule. "Your SAT prep should be your priority." "I can do both," I insisted. "I've maintained a 3.8 GPA while doing music." "For now," he said dismissively. "But junior year is critical for college applications. West Point doesn't care about choir trophies." The mention of West Point, his alma mater and his dream for me, made my stomach clench. We'd had this argument before. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, to continue the Martinez military legacy. I wanted to study music. Despite his disapproval, I joined the choir. Mr. Alvarez was demanding but fair, pushing us to perfection. Under his guidance, I learned proper breathing techniques, how to control my vibrato, and how to perform with emotion without sacrificing technique. Our choir won regional competitions, and I was selected for solos more and more frequently. My father refused to attend any performances. During our first major concert, I scanned the audience and saw only my mother, sitting alone, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. When I asked her later where he was, she sighed. "He had paperwork to catch up on, honey." But I knew the truth. He was making a point. The conflict came to a head after a particularly successful performance where I had my first major solo. I came home buzzing with excitement, only to find my father in the living room, flipping through military recruitment brochures. "How was the show?" he asked, not looking up. "Amazing," I said, still breathless. "Mr. Alvarez said my solo was the best he's heard from a junior." "That's nice," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Now that you've had your fun, we should talk about summer programs. There's a leadership camp at Virginia Tech that would look good on your West Point application." The dismissal stung. Did you hear what I said? This was important to me. I heard you, he replied, his voice hardening. But singing little songs in a school auditorium isn't going to prepare you for the real world, Sophia. You sound like a wounded animal half the time anyway. The words hit like a physical blow. You've never even heard me sing, I said, my voice cracking. I've heard enough through your bedroom door, he said. It's a hobby, not a career path. The sooner you accept that, the better. I stormed to my room, tears blurring my vision. My mother came in later, sitting on the edge of my bed as I sobbed. He doesn't mean it, sweetie, she said, stroking my hair. He just wants what he thinks is best for you. He's never even given my music a chance, I cried. He's decided it's worthless without ever really listening. My mother had no answer for that. The next day at school, I found solace with my friends. Zach, a talented drummer with wild, curly hair and perpetually paint-stained fingers, and Alyssa, a bass player who'd been my chemistry lab partner freshman year. We'd been jamming together informally for months. My dad basically said I sound like a dying cat, I told them during lunch. Parents don't get it, Zach said, tapping out a rhythm on the table with his fingers. My mom still calls my drumming that banging noise. Alyssa nodded. My parents think bass is just for guys. They keep asking when I'm going to learn a real instrument, like piano. Their understanding was comforting, but it didn't erase the sting of my father's words. We should start a real band, Zach suggested suddenly. The three of us. You've got all these amazing songs no one's hearing. The idea took root, and within weeks, we were practicing regularly in Zach's garage. We called ourselves Homefront, a small act of defiance on my part. We played at school events, then at a local coffee shop that hosted an open mic night for teens. Word spread about our little band. We weren't revolutionary, but we had something authentic that resonated with people. My lyrics about longing, absence, and finding your voice struck a chord with other teens. For the first time, I felt like my music mattered beyond my own bedroom. I put up posters of our gigs on my bedroom walls, alongside images of my musical influences, Joni Mitchell, Tracy Chapman, Brandi Carlile. My little sanctuary of music. One afternoon, I came home to find my father standing in my room, tearing down the posters. "What are you doing?" I demanded, rushing to stop him. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice military calm, but his actions violent as he ripped a poster advertising our next coffee shop performance. "You're spending all your time with this band nonsense instead of focusing on your future." "This is my future," I shouted, grabbing at the poster in his hands. "You have no right." "I have every right," he countered. "I'm your father, and I won't stand by while you throw away your potential on some teenage fantasy." "You don't even know what my potential is," I said, my voice breaking. "You've never bothered to find out." The argument escalated until my mother intervened, physically placing herself between us. The damage was done, to both my room and whatever fragile understanding I'd hoped might eventually form between my father and me. The tension simmered for months, breaking into occasional arguments, but mostly manifesting as cold silence. My mother became the reluctant intermediary, carrying messages between two people who lived in the same house, but existed in different worlds. By the time graduation approached, the divide was a chasm. My father had begun leaving college brochures around the house, all for schools with strong ROTC programs. I had applied to several music programs without telling him, using money I'd saved from our coffee shop gigs to pay the application fees. On graduation day, after the ceremony, we had a small celebration at home. My mother had prepared all my favorite foods, and for a brief moment, there was peace. Then my father raised a toast. To Sophia and her bright future at Virginia Tech, following in the Martinez tradition of service. I set down my glass. "I haven't decided on Virginia Tech, Dad." His smile faltered. "We discussed this. Their ROTC program is excellent, and with my recommendation. I've been accepted to Berklee College of Music," I interrupted. "And Belmont University, both with scholarships." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother looked between us, her face pale. "Music schools," my father finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "After everything we've talked about?" "No, after everything you've talked about," I corrected. You've never once asked what I want. Because what you want is a fantasy, he exploded, slamming his hand on the table. You want to chase some childish dream while your peers are building real careers, serving their country. There are other ways to serve, I shot back. Music helps people. It matters. It's selfish indulgence, he countered. And I won't support it. The implications of his words hung in the air. My mother gasped softly. James, surely you don't mean. If she chooses this path, she does it without my help, he said firmly. No tuition, no support. I looked at him, this man who'd always been more legend than father to me, and felt something break free inside me. Fine, I said quietly. I'll do it on my own. And in that moment, I knew I would. Whatever it took. The State University of Washington wasn't Berkeley or Belmont, but it had a solid music program and offered me enough financial aid to make it work. Located just outside Seattle, it became my home for the next 4 years, and my first taste of real independence. My father had made good on his threat. Not a penny of his money would support my musical fantasies, as he called them. My mother slipped me some cash when she could, looking guilty each time, but it wasn't enough. I took on 3 part-time jobs, mornings at a campus coffee shop, afternoons at the university library, and weekends waitressing at a diner near my cheap off-campus apartment. Between work and classes, I practiced until my fingers blistered and my voice grew hoarse. The schedule was punishing, but each exhausted night, I fell asleep knowing I was forging my own path. My freshman composition professor, Dr. Wallace, was the first to notice the unique perspective in my songs. You write about absence in a way that's uncommonly nuanced, he told me after class one day. Most young songwriters tackle love and heartbreak, but you're exploring something different, the space left when someone is physically gone but emotionally present. His observation startled me. I hadn't consciously been writing about my relationship with my father, but the themes were unmistakable once he pointed them out. Keep pulling on that thread, he advised. The most powerful songwriting comes from examining our deepest wounds. By sophomore year, I developed a distinctive style, folk with jazz influences, lyrics that told stories of separation and resilience. I performed at campus events and local venues whenever I could. Small crowds became medium-sized ones. People began to recognize me around the music department. It was during my junior year that I met Professor Taylor, a visiting instructor who had worked as a producer in Nashville before turning to teaching. After hearing me perform at a department showcase, she asked me to stay after class. Your technical skills are solid, she said, leaning against her desk. But you're holding back emotionally. Your lyrics hint at deeper stories, but you're not fully committing to them. I'm not sure what you mean, I said, shifting uncomfortably. I mean you're writing around your pain instead of through it, she replied. The songs that change people's lives are the ones where the artist is brave enough to be completely vulnerable. What are you afraid of? Her question hit closer to home than she could have known. What was I afraid of? Being dismissed? Being told my feelings didn't matter? It all traced back to those moments in my childhood when my father had mocked my music, belittled my passion. Professor Taylor assigned me a challenging project, write a song that terrified me to perform. Something so personal it made me uncomfortable to share it. I struggled for weeks. I started and abandoned a dozen songs. Nothing felt right until one sleepless night when I began writing about what it felt like to grow up loving someone who couldn't see you clearly. The lyrics poured out until dawn, a song called Coming Home about the complicated emotions of a military family. The anticipation and dread. The stranger who returns different each time. The constant readjustment. When I performed it in Professor Taylor's class, my voice cracked on the bridge. Several students wiped away tears. Professor Taylor nodded slowly when I finished. That, she said simply, is what I was talking about. Coming Home became my signature piece. I performed it at every gig, and it always connected deeply with the audience. In Seattle, with its naval base and military presence, the song resonated particularly strongly. After shows, people would approach me, often with tears in their eyes, to tell me their own stories of military life. That spring, I entered a regional songwriting contest on Professor Taylor's encouragement. The competition was fierce. talented writers from across the Pacific Northwest. I performed Coming Home in the finals, pouring everything I had into the performance. I won first place. The prize was modest, $1,000 and a day in a professional recording studio, but the validation was priceless. Local music blogs covered the contest, and for a brief moment, I felt like my dream might actually be within reach. I called my mother with the news, my voice breathless with excitement. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "I'm so proud of you." "Is Dad there?" I asked, already knowing the answer would disappoint me. There was a pause. "He's here. Do you want to speak with him?" I hesitated, then said yes. I heard muffled voices, then my father's gruff hello. "I won a songwriting contest, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's kind of a big deal. They're going to record one of my songs professionally." There was a long pause. "That's nice, Sophia." A hobby win is always encouraging. The dismissal was so familiar it almost didn't hurt. Almost. "It's not a hobby, Dad. It's my career. I'm good at it. People connect with my music." "Sure," he said, his voice distant. "Look, your mother and I are about to have dinner. Keep up with your studies, all right?" Before I could respond, he had handed the phone back to my mother. During my senior year, I reconnected with Jason Foster, a childhood friend who had grown up on the same military base as me for a few years. He was now in the ROTC program at a neighboring university. We ran into each other at a coffee shop in Seattle, and despite the years and different paths, fell easily into conversation. "So you're really doing it," he said, gesturing to the guitar case propped against my chair. "You always said you would be a musician." "Trying to," I admitted. "It's harder than I thought." "How about you? Following the military path?" He nodded, stirring his coffee. "It makes sense for me. I believe in the mission." He studied me for a moment. "Your dad still giving you a hard time about music?" I laughed without humor. That would require him to acknowledge what I'm doing at all. Jason's perspective on military life was different from my father's. Where my father saw rigid duty, Jason saw purpose and brotherhood. He talked about his training with enthusiasm, but without the dismissal of civilian life my father always displayed. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the military isn't all your dad. There are people who serve who also value art. Music is a huge part of military tradition, actually." His words stuck with me, opening a small crack in the wall I'd built between my world and my father's. Our friendship rekindled. Jason became a bridge between the military world I'd rejected and the artistic life I was building. He attended my performances when he could, and through him, I began to see the military community as individuals rather than an extension of my father's rigidity. In November of senior year, my mother called with news that sent me rushing home. She had found a lump in her breast. The biopsy was scheduled for the following week. For the first time in years, I returned to my childhood home for more than a brief, tense holiday visit. My father and I maintained an uneasy truce during the crisis. We orbited around my mother, both focused on her needs rather than our ongoing conflict. When the results came back benign, the relief was overwhelming. My mother insisted on a celebration dinner. Sitting at our old dining table, the conversation remained superficial until my mother deliberately brought up my music. "Sophia's been doing so well with her songwriting," she said brightly. "Tell your father about the contest, honey." I reluctantly repeated the news about the songwriting contest, downplaying it to avoid my father's dismissal. To my surprise, he nodded. "Your mother showed me the article," he said stiffly. "Congratulations." The acknowledgement, small as it was, caught me off guard. "Thank you." Still, he continued, unable to help himself, contests are one thing. A sustainable career is another. "Have you thought about what you'll do after graduation? Music is a tough field. Very few make it." And just like that, the moment was gone. My mother's face fell as I pushed back my chair. "I'm one of the few who will," I said firmly. "You'd know that if you'd ever bothered to listen." I left the table and spent the rest of the evening in my old room, writing lyrics that would later become a song about the walls we build to protect ourselves, walls that eventually become prisons. When I returned to school, I threw myself into my senior showcase with renewed determination. Every dismissal, every mockery, every doubt my father had ever expressed became fuel. I would prove him wrong. I had to. Seattle in January was a gray, rain-soaked challenge, especially for a newly graduated music major with more ambition than connections. I found a tiny studio apartment in the Belltown neighborhood with just enough room for my bed, a small desk, and my instruments. The rent ate most of my savings, but I was determined to make it in a city with a vibrant music scene. Reality set in quickly. Open mic nights didn't pay bills. The coffee shop where I landed a barista job barely covered rent. I picked up weekend shifts at a bar and taught guitar lessons to middle schoolers on weekday afternoons. Between jobs, I performed anywhere that would have me: cafes, small venues, street corners when the rain let up. Some nights, exhausted and doubting, I'd stare at my ceiling and wonder if my father had been right all along. Maybe this was a childish fantasy. Maybe I was fooling myself. But then I'd play a show, see the faces in the audience connecting with my lyrics, and remember why I was fighting so hard. Music reached people in ways nothing else could. I just needed someone to help me reach more people. 3 months into my Seattle struggle, I met Mike Williams. He was ordering a complicated latte at the coffee shop where I worked, wearing a vintage band t-shirt that prompted me to compliment his taste. "You know the Replacements?" he asked, surprised. "My musical education was thorough, if not conventional," I replied. We got to talking, and I learned he worked as a producer at a small independent studio in the city. When he mentioned they were looking for session vocalists, I immediately told him I was interested. "You any good?" he asked bluntly. "Yes," I answered, with the confidence that comes from years of having to believe in yourself when no one else does. He smiled at that. "Bring a demo by the studio tomorrow." No promises. I spent that night selecting and re-recording my strongest songs. The next day, heart-pounding, I delivered the USB drive to the address he'd given me. 2 days later, he called. "You weren't lying," he said without preamble. "You've got something real. Want to come in and do some backup vocals for a folk rock group we're recording?" That first session led to others. The pay was minimal, but the experience and connections were valuable. Mike became both a mentor and a friend, offering honest feedback and industry insights. He believed in my talent in a way few others had. "You've got a voice that tells stories," he told me one night as we were leaving the studio. "That's rare. And your songwriting has this authentic quality, especially the military family stuff. It hits hard because it's lived experience." In April, my mother called with news that she was coming to visit. She'd never been to Seattle before, and I was excited to show her my new life, modest as it was. I cleaned my tiny apartment obsessively and prepared to show her the best version of my struggling musician existence. When she arrived, she brought several boxes of my things from home. "I found these while spring cleaning," she explained, setting down a box labeled Sophia, Grandma's things. Inside were items my grandmother had left me when she passed away during my sophomore year of college: photo albums, a few pieces of jewelry, and a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. "What are these?" I asked, carefully untying the ribbon. "Letters between your grandmother and a soldier she knew before she met your grandfather," my mother explained. "I think they were sweethearts during Vietnam. She never talked much about him." That night, after showing my mother around the city and settling her on my pull-out couch, I stayed up reading the letters. They were beautiful, heartbreaking exchanges between my grandmother, Elaine, and a young lieutenant named Michael Thompson. Their love blazed through the yellowed pages, as did the terror of separation during war. What struck me most was how Lieutenant Thompson wrote about the things he couldn't tell her, the classified missions, the danger he faced. He used a kind of code, references they both understood. Reading between the lines, I could sense the weight of what remained unsaid. The last letter was from a fellow soldier, informing my grandmother that Lieutenant Thompson had been killed in action during a classified operation. The details were sparse, heavily censored by Military Review before being sent to her. The official story mentioned only that he died serving his country honorably. I was deeply moved by this glimpse into my grandmother's past, a love story I'd never known about. The next morning, I showed the letters to my mother. "Did Dad ever know about this?" I asked. She shook her head. Your grandmother rarely spoke of Michael, even to me. It was too painful for her. I only learned about him after she died, when I found these letters among her things. The story haunted me. After my mother returned home, I found myself returning to the letters again and again. There was something about the unspoken grief, the official silencing of personal tragedy, that resonated deeply with me. I began writing a new song, Silent Battles, inspired by my grandmother's lost love. The lyrics explored how war creates private griefs that never make the history books, the loved ones left behind with censored explanations and partially told truths. I incorporated details from the letters, references to a moonlight mission and ghosts in the jungle that Lieutenant Thompson had mentioned. When I played the rough version for Mike at the studio, he fell silent for a long moment after the final chord. "That's the one," he said finally. "That's the song that's going to make people really hear you." We recorded Silent Battles properly, with Mike adding subtle production elements that enhanced the emotional impact without overwhelming the storytelling. When it was finished, I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. The song was the best work I'd ever done, but it had emerged from such profound loss. I sent the recording to my mother, along with a note explaining its inspiration. She called me an hour after I knew she would have received the email, her voice thick with tears. "It's beautiful, Sophia," she said. "Your grandmother would have been so moved. You've honored her story perfectly. Do you think Dad would listen to it?" I asked, not sure why I still sought his approval after all this time. She hesitated. "I don't know, honey, but I'll try." A week later, she called again. "The strangest thing happened," she said. "I was playing your song in the kitchen, not thinking about your father being home. He came in and just stopped. He stood there listening to the whole thing. When it ended, he asked whose song it was." "What did he say when you told him?" I asked, my heart beating faster. "Nothing," she replied. He just nodded and left the room. "But Sophia, he listened to the whole song. That's something." It was a small crack in the wall between us, but I'd take it. Meanwhile, Jason had been promoted within his ROTC program and was preparing for active duty after graduation. During one of our coffee meetups, I played him Silent Battles. "This is powerful stuff," he said when the song ended. "You really captured something about military life that civilians rarely understand." Then he looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, there's a military benefit concert happening next month. It's a pretty prestigious event, raises money for veterans' mental health programs. I might be able to get you a performance slot." "Really?" I asked, surprised. "Would they want someone like me? I'm not exactly mainstream." "That's exactly why they might want you," he countered. "This song speaks directly to military families in a way that's authentic. Let me make some calls." 2 weeks later, Jason called with news that the event organizers had reviewed my music and wanted me to perform a short set at the benefit. It would be the most high-profile performance of my career, attended by military officials, politicians, and donors with deep pockets. "They especially want you to perform Silent Battles," he added. That song really resonated with the committee. As the date approached, I rehearsed obsessively, polishing my set until each song gleamed. Mike helped me prepare, offering technical advice and moral support. "This could be a big break for you," he said. "These events are full of connected people. Make the most of it." The night before the benefit, my mother called. "I've got a surprise for you," she said, her voice unusually excited. "Your father and I are flying out for your performance." I nearly dropped the phone. "Dad's coming?" "Voluntarily." "It was his idea," she said, sounding as shocked as I felt. When I mentioned Jason had gotten you this opportunity, something changed in his expression. He said we should be there. I hung up feeling a strange mix of hope and anxiety. After all these years of dismissal and conflict, my father was finally going to hear me sing. Really hear me. What I didn't know then was how profoundly that night would change everything. The morning of the benefit concert dawned clear and crisp, a rarity for Seattle in early spring. I stood at my apartment window, watching the sun glint off Puget Sound, trying to calm my racing heart. In just a few hours, I would perform the most important show of my career, in front of my father, who had spent years mocking my musical aspirations. My mother had texted that their flight had landed and they were checking into their hotel. They would meet me at the venue. The thought of seeing my father in the audience was both terrifying and strangely motivating. After all these years, he would finally have to acknowledge what I'd built on my own. Mike came by to pick me up early, his vintage Volvo idling outside my building. "Ready for the big night?" he asked as I slid into the passenger seat with my guitar case. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my dress nervously. I'd chosen a simple black dress, professional but not flashy. This wasn't a regular gig. It was a military event. I needed to show respect. "You're going to kill it," Mike assured me. "Just remember what we talked about. Stay present, connect with the lyrics, and don't rush the emotional moments." We arrived at the Benaroya Hall 3 hours before the event. The venue was magnificent, all gleaming wood and soaring ceilings, typically home to the Seattle Symphony. Volunteers and staff bustled about, arranging flowers and adjusting lighting. A massive American flag hung as the backdrop for the stage. Jason met us at the stage door, resplendent in his formal uniform. "Sophia," he greeted me with a hug. "This place is going to be packed." The committee sold out all the tickets. Major donors, military brass, politicians, they're all coming. My stomach tightened. "No pressure or anything." He laughed. "You'll be great. Just stick to what you know. These people will appreciate authenticity over flash." He glanced at his watch. "I've got to help with some last-minute arrangements. The green room is down that hallway. They've got snacks, water, whatever you need." During sound check, I got my first real look at the auditorium, 2,500 seats that would soon be filled with people far more accustomed to symphony performances than indie folk music. The thought was overwhelming. I closed my eyes during the run-through of Silent Battles, focusing only on the story and the lyrics, the connection to my grandmother's letters. The sound technician gave me a thumbs up. "Beautiful tone," he said. "You're all set." I retreated to the green room to warm up my voice and try to calm my nerves. Other performers came and went. A military choir, a jazz ensemble, a country singer who had several radio hits. Everyone was professional and focused. I felt like an imposter among them. As the start time approached, I peeked through the curtains at the audience filing in. Men and women in formal military dress, politicians in expensive suits, donors dripping with understated wealth. And then I saw them, my parents, being shown to their seats about halfway back. My mother, elegant in a blue dress I'd never seen before. My father, rigid in his dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. "Breathe," I whispered to myself. "Just breathe." The event began with speeches, a general thanking donors, a politician praising military families, a veterans advocate explaining how the funds would be used. Then the performances started. The military choir sang stirring patriotic songs. The jazz ensemble performed swing classics from the World War II era. Each act was received with appreciative applause. Backstage, I paced, clutching my guitar case. Jason appeared briefly. "You're on after the next act," he informed me. "By the way, I should mention, General William Thompson is here. Front row center." He's the highest-ranking officer in attendance and a key supporter of the Veterans Mental Health Initiative. The name sent a shock through me. "Thompson? As in Michael Thompson?" Jason looked confused. "I don't know a Michael Thompson. General William Thompson is the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. 4-star general. Very big deal." Before I could explain about the letters, the stage manager was gesturing for me to get ready. The country singer was finishing his set to enthusiastic applause. And then it was time. The MC introduced me briefly. "Next, we have a young singer-songwriter whose music speaks powerfully to the experience of military families. Please welcome Sophia Martinez." Walking onto that bass stage, guitar in hand, I felt simultaneously tiny and powerful. The lights were bright enough that I could only make out the first few rows of the audience. I saw my father sitting stiffly, his expression unreadable. In the front row sat an older man with silver hair and the most impressive uniform I'd ever seen, General Thompson, presumably. "Good evening," I said into the microphone, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for having me here tonight." I grew up in a military family, and my songs come from that experience. The waiting, the uncertainty, the pride, and the fear. I began with two of my more straightforward songs about military life, pieces that acknowledged sacrifice without being too emotionally raw. The audience responded warmly, with polite applause. I could see my mother smiling encouragingly. My father remained impassive. Then it was time for silent battles. I took a deep breath and addressed the audience again. This final song was inspired by letters I recently discovered, correspondence between my grandmother and a young lieutenant during Vietnam. He was killed in action on a classified mission, and she received only the barest details of how he died. This song is for all those who've had to piece together their grief from redacted information and official silences. I began the gentle guitar intro, my fingers finding the notes automatically. The first verse established the love story. A young woman waiting for letters, a soldier writing from a jungle base. The second verse described the coded language they developed to communicate around sensors. It was during the bridge, where I incorporated specific phrases from Lieutenant Thompson's letters, that I noticed something strange happening in the front row. General Thompson had gone completely rigid, his face draining of color. His aide leaned toward him, whispering something, but the general waved him off, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that was almost frightening. The chorus swelled as I sang about moonlight missions and ghost soldiers moving through valleys, exact phrases from the letters. General Thompson abruptly stood, swaying slightly. For a terrible moment, I thought he might be having a medical emergency. Several aides immediately moved toward him, but he held up a hand to stop them. Without taking his eyes off me, he turned and quickly left the auditorium through a side door. The disruption was brief but noticeable. I forced myself to continue, though my heart was racing. What had just happened? Had I somehow offended him with my song? As I moved into the final verse, about the official letter informing my grandmother of her love's death, I glanced toward my parents' seats. My mother looked confused by the general's departure. But it was my father's expression that truly shocked me. The military stoicism had cracked, revealing something I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock and what looked almost like fear. And then, as the last chorus began, he too stood and quickly exited his row, heading for the lobby. I finished the song to the strongest applause of the night, but I barely registered it. My mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. Why had both General Thompson and my father reacted so strongly to my song? As I thanked the audience and left the stage, my hands were trembling. Jason was waiting in the wings, his expression concerned. "What happened out there?" he asked in a low voice. "General Thompson never leaves during performances. It's considered disrespectful." "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But I need to find my father." Before I could head to the lobby, a uniformed aide approached us. "Ms. Martinez? General Thompson would like to speak with you." Immediately, Jason and I exchanged alarmed glances. This was unprecedented. "Is something wrong?" I asked. The aide's expression gave nothing away. "The general is waiting in the director's office. If you'll follow me." As we moved through the backstage area, my mind spun with possibilities. Had I accidentally revealed classified information? Was I in some kind of trouble? All I knew was that somehow, a song inspired by my grandmother's old love letters had just turned my most important performance into something far more complicated than I could have imagined. The director's office was a wood-paneled room with Seattle's skyline visible through large windows. When I entered, General Thompson was standing with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the city lights. He turned at the sound of the door closing behind me. Up close, he was imposing, tall with silver hair and the ramrod-straight posture of a lifetime soldier. His face was lined but handsome, and his eyes were startlingly familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his voice controlled but tense. "That song you just performed. Where did you hear those phrases?" "Moonlight missions. Ghosts in the jungle." I swallowed hard. "From letters, sir. Letters written to my grandmother during Vietnam by a Lieutenant Michael Thompson." At the name, the general's composure slipped momentarily. He gestured to a chair. Please sit down. As I sat, Jason positioned himself protectively near me, clearly concerned about this unusual situation. Lieutenant Michael Thompson, the general said softly, was my brother. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Your brother? He nodded, moving to sit behind the desk. My younger brother. Killed in 1968 during a classified operation. He studied my face intently. Your grandmother was Elaine Carter. Yes, I whispered. How did you know? Michael wrote about her constantly. I was deployed in the same region at the time. She was all he talked about when we managed to meet. He shook his head slowly. I never met her myself. After Michael died, communication stopped. The nature of his death complicated things. What do you mean? I asked. The general hesitated, glancing at Jason. Captain Foster, this conversation may veer into sensitive areas. Jason straightened. I understand, sir. I have security clearance. General Thompson nodded. Ms. Martinez, the phrases in your song, they were code words for a highly classified operation. Information that was never made public. The official record of how Michael died was incomplete. The letters mentioned the mission was classified, I said. But they passed through military censors. Some details were allowed through because they seemed innocuous without context, he explained. But those phrases you sang tonight, they had specific meanings. Operational details that were known only to those involved. His eyes narrowed slightly. Which is why I'm struggling to understand how they ended up in your song, sung with such accuracy. Before I could respond, the door opened behind me. I turned to see my father standing in the doorway, his face ashen. Sir, he said, addressing the general while barely glancing at me. I apologize for the interruption. Major Martinez, the general acknowledged. Come in. I believe this concerns you as well. My father entered stiffly, standing at parade rest rather than taking a seat. I stared at him in confusion. How did he know General Thompson? Your daughter was just explaining how she came to know operational details of Ghost Team missions, the general said. My father's jaw tightened. I can assure you, sir, I never discussed classified information with my daughter. I told you, I interjected, frustration rising. I got the phrases from letters written to my grandmother. I had no idea they were operationally significant. General Thompson looked between us. Major Martinez, you served under my command in Desert Storm, correct? Yes, sir, my father confirmed. 82nd Airborne. We were part of the Quick Reaction Force. And before that, the general pressed. My father hesitated. I was recruited from West Point directly into Special Operations, sir. Under Colonel Davis initially, then under your command for the Nicaragua operation in '89. The general nodded slowly. The same unit designation that evolved from my brother's team in Vietnam. We maintained many of the same protocols, the same terminology. Understanding began to dawn. I looked between the two men, piecing it together. The phrases in my grandmother's letters, I said slowly, they weren't just meaningless code between lovers. They were actual operational terms. Terms that were still being used when you served, Dad. My father didn't respond, but the muscle in his jaw jumped. What I don't understand, General Thompson said, is how you captured the emotional weight of those operations in your lyrics. The sense of... He struggled for the word. Dread, my father supplied quietly. The weight of knowing what those missions really entailed. I stared at my father. What are you saying? For the first time since entering the room, he looked directly at me. Something in his expression had changed. A wall had come down, revealing a vulnerability I'd never seen before. Your voice, he said, the words seeming to cost him. When you sing about those things, it's like you know. Like you've been there. He shook his head. The first time I heard you really sing, not just practicing, but performing, you were 13. You'd written a song about waiting, about fear. Your mother recorded it for me when I was deployed. This was news to me. She sent you recordings of my songs? He nodded. Many of them over the years. I listened to all of them. But you always said my singing was terrible, I said, confusion and hurt mixing in my voice. You mocked it, called it noise. Because it terrified me, he admitted, the words barely audible. Your voice, the way you could capture feelings I've spent decades trying to bury. It was like you could see right through me, through all my defenses. How could you know what it feels like unless... He trailed off. Unless you'd lived it, General Thompson finished for him. That's what struck me about your performance tonight. You sang about classified operations you couldn't possibly have knowledge of, but with the emotional truth of someone who'd been in the jungle with us. My father turned to the general. When I heard her sing that song tonight, using those exact phrases, I thought somehow she'd discovered my service records. That she'd learned what those missions really involved. What did they involve? I asked quietly. Both men went silent. Finally, General Thompson spoke. Operations that never officially happened, he said carefully. Actions that were necessary but couldn't be acknowledged. The kind of missions that leave marks on the soul. He looked directly at me. The kind of experiences that make a father terrified to hear his daughter sing about them with such intuitive understanding. My father sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I couldn't bear it, he admitted. Hearing my own daughter somehow channel the darkest parts of my life through her music. It was easier to shut it down, to pretend it was just noise, than to face what it stirred up. I stared at him, years of hurt and confusion crashing against this new understanding. So you didn't actually think I was bad at singing? A small, sad smile touched his lips. Sophia, you have the most haunting voice I've ever heard. That was the problem. From the first time I really listened, I knew your voice would force people to feel things they might not want to feel. Including me. Your father served with distinction, General Thompson added. In operations that required compartmentalization of the highest order. The psychological toll of such service is substantial. PTSD, I said, the realization dawning. That's why you couldn't listen to my music. It was triggering. My father nodded slowly. Your song's about waiting, about absence. They captured what it's like from both sides too accurately. And tonight, hearing those operational phrases in your grandmother's letters. He shook his head. It was like worlds colliding that were never supposed to meet. I never knew, I whispered. All these years, I thought you just didn't believe in me. It was easier that way, he admitted. Easier than explaining why your beautiful voice cut me open every time I heard it. He looked at me directly. I'm sorry, Sophia. I handled it wrong. All of it. The general cleared his throat. This is an extraordinary coincidence, or perhaps not coincidence at all. The daughter of one of my officers, singing about classified operations conducted by my brother, using his exact words. He shook his head in wonder. The universe works in mysterious ways. Jason, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. Sir, this seems like a family matter that might benefit from some privacy. General Thompson nodded. Of course. He stood, straightening his uniform. Ms. Martinez, your song tonight was deeply moving. Whatever its origins, it captured something true about service and sacrifice. He extended his hand. Thank you for honoring my brother's memory, even if unknowingly. I shook his hand, still processing everything I'd learned. Thank you for telling me the truth about him. My grandmother never really knew what happened. Few did, he said solemnly. That was the nature of the war we fought. He turned to my father. Major Martinez, take some time with your daughter. That's in order. After the general and Jason left, my father and I sat in silence for several long moments. 27 years of misunderstanding stretched between us like a minefield. I thought you hated my music, I finally said. I thought you hated what I loved most. I was afraid of it, he corrected quietly. Afraid of what it stirred up. Afraid of how it seemed to come from somewhere, beyond you. He looked down at his hands. It was easier to dismiss it than to explain why it affected me so deeply. You could have told me, I said, tears threatening. All these years, I've been fighting to prove myself to you. I know, he acknowledged. I told myself I was protecting you, from disappointment, from an unstable career. But really, I was protecting myself. From the feelings your music dragged to the surface. He met my eyes. I was wrong, Sophia. You have a gift. A powerful one. The admission, after so many years of conflict, broke something open inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I just wanted you to hear me, I whispered. Really hear me. I always did, he admitted. That was the problem. The days following the benefit concert passed in a blur of revelations and tentative new beginnings. My parents extended their stay in Seattle, booking a hotel for an additional week. For the first time in my adult life, I was spending real time with my father, not just the obligatory holiday visits filled with tense small talk, but genuine conversations. We met for breakfast the morning after the concert at a small cafe near Pike Place Market. The awkwardness was palpable as we settled into our seats, two people who had been emotional strangers for so long. "I don't know where to start," my father admitted, stirring his coffee absently. "Maybe with honesty," I suggested. "After all these years of whatever that was between us." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He took a deep breath. "I was diagnosed with PTSD in the mid-90s after Desert Storm. It wasn't called that when I first experienced symptoms after Nicaragua. Back then, they just told us to tough it out." "Mom never said anything," I remarked. "I asked her not to," he replied. "Military culture was different then. Mental health issues were seen as weakness. I was afraid it would affect my career." "So you just suffered in silence?" A sad smile touched his lips. "The Martinez way, apparently." He looked out the window for a moment. "Music was always a trigger for me. Certain songs, certain tones would take me right back to those moments I was trying to forget." "When you started singing, developing your own style." He shook his head. "It was like you had access to something inside me that I'd locked away. I didn't know how to handle it." "So you shut it down," I said. "Shut me down." "I thought I was protecting both of us," he admitted. I was wrong. Over that week, piece by piece, we began rebuilding a relationship that had never properly existed. I learned about his childhood with a father even stricter than he had been, about his early days in special operations, about the missions that had left invisible scars. He learned about my struggles as a musician, my small victories, my dreams for the future. The conversations weren't always easy. Years of hurt and misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a few days. There were moments of frustration, of old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But something fundamental had changed. We were finally seeing each other clearly. On their last night in Seattle, my father came to see me perform at a small venue where I had a regular weekend slot. He sat at a table near the back, my mother beside him holding his hand. I couldn't see his face clearly through the stage lights, but I could feel his presence, not as a critic, but as a witness. After my set, he approached the small stage as I was packing up my guitar. "That last song," he said. "Is it new?" I nodded. "I wrote it this week." He seemed to struggle for words. I felt it. From anyone else, it might have seemed like faint praise. From my father, it was everything. 3 days after my parents returned home, I received an unexpected call from General Thompson. "Ms. Martinez," his formal voice greeted me. "I've been thinking about your performance and the remarkable connection to my brother's story." "It's still hard to believe," I admitted. "Indeed. Which is why I have a proposition for you. I'm involved with several veterans organizations focused on mental health and reintegration. We've found that the arts, particularly music, can be therapeutic for those struggling with service-related trauma. Would you be interested in performing for some of our programs?" The opportunity was unexpected, but immediately felt right. "I'd be honored, sir." What began as a single performance for a veterans group expanded into something larger. General Thompson introduced me to organizers of military family support networks, to therapists working with music as treatment for PTSD, to other performers with military connections. My audience grew, not in the mainstream music scene I'd initially imagined, but in a community that deeply understood what my songs were expressing. My father, tentatively at first, began sharing more of his experiences, which informed new songs I was writing. One evening, about a month after the benefit concert, I received an email from him, the first he'd ever sent that wasn't purely practical information. Attached was a document titled Nicaragua, 1989. It contained details of his experiences that he'd never shared verbally, offered now as material for my music. "Some things are easier to write than say," his brief message read. "Maybe they're easier to sing than speak, too." That document became the foundation for a new collection of songs, more direct, more specific in their exploration of military experience than anything I'd written before. When I sent him rough recordings, his responses were thoughtful and engaged. He pointed out where I'd captured something essential, suggested adjustments where I'd missed nuances. In July, I was invited to perform at a larger veteran center in Portland. My parents drove up from their home, my father looking both nervous and proud as he took his seat. During the performance, I debuted a new song called Inheritance about the unspoken legacies that pass between generations. Halfway through the song, I glanced over and saw something I'd never witnessed before. My father, eyes closed, singing quietly along with the chorus. He'd listened to the demo enough to learn the words. The sight nearly made me forget my own lyrics. After the show, several veterans approached him, recognizing the uniform ribbon on his jacket lapel. For the first time, I watched my father open up to strangers about his experiences, connected through the songs I'd written. It was as if the music had created a bridge that words alone could not build. "Your daughter's music," I overheard one older veteran tell him. "It's like she's been there." My father glanced at me across the room. "In some ways, she has." 2 months later, I received life-changing news. A small but respected record label specializing in folk and Americana had heard my performances at the veterans events. They were interested in producing an album of my military-themed songs. "There's an audience for this," the label representative explained. "Not just military families, but anyone who wants to understand that experience. Your songs make something distant feel immediate and personal." When I called my father with the news, his response was immediate. "I'm proud of you, Sophia." Simple words that I'd waited a lifetime to hear. The album production process was intense and rewarding. My father consulted on lyrics, occasionally suggesting adjustments to better capture the reality of military life. General Thompson contributed a short essay for the liner notes, explaining how music could bridge the gap between military and civilian understanding. We titled the album Silent Battles, after the song that had started everything. The cover art featured intertwined dog tags and guitar strings, a visual representation of the two worlds I was connecting. The most profound moment came during the recording of a song called Deployment Diary, which chronicled a year in the life of a military family. I'd arranged for my father to speak the dates that structured the song: departure, rare phone calls, return. His voice, hesitant at first, grew stronger with each take. When we finished, the studio was silent. The sound engineer, a Vietnam veteran himself, wiped away tears before giving us a thumbs up. "That's the one," he said simply. The album release coincided with Veterans Day. We held a special performance at a theater in my hometown, the place where my musical journey had begun amidst such conflict. The audience was a mix of military families, veterans, and local music lovers. General Thompson attended with his wife, as did many of the veterans I'd met over the past months. Before the final song, I invited my father to join me on stage. He looked terrified but determined as he took his place beside me. This song is called Both Sides Now, not the Joni Mitchell classic, but a new piece about seeing the same experience from different perspectives, I explained to the audience. For the first time, my father will be performing with me. We hadn't rehearsed extensively. His military schedule and my recording commitments had limited our practice time. But as we began singing together, something almost magical happened. His deep baritone, untrained but emotionally resonant, perfectly complemented my more polished vocals. We weren't just singing in harmony. We were finally telling a complete story together. The soldier and the one who waits, the father and daughter, the past and future of a family defined by service and sacrifice. When we finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Through tears, I watched my father accept the applause, not with military stoicism, but with visible emotion. He had finally allowed himself to be seen, to be vulnerable, through the very medium he had once feared. In the year that followed, my music career flourished in ways I never expected. Silent Battles received critical acclaim and found a devoted audience. I toured military bases and veteran centers, colleges, and folk festivals. The songs sparked conversations about the hidden costs of service, the complex experiences of military families, the struggles of reintegration. But the most meaningful success was the healing that continued between my father and me. The wall that had separated us for so long hadn't come down all at once, but brick by brick, as we learned to truly hear each other. Music, which had once been our greatest point of conflict, became our strongest connection. On the anniversary of the benefit concert that had changed everything, I received a package from my father. Inside was a restored version of my grandmother's guitar, the one I'd learned on all those years ago. He'd had it professionally refurbished, the chipped headstock repaired, the worn frets replaced, but the soul of the instrument preserved. The note attached read simply, "Your voice was never the problem." It was what I needed to hear most. Keep singing. Love, Dad. I understand now that art does what words often cannot. It bypasses our defenses and speaks directly to our hidden truths. My father couldn't tell me about his pain, but my music somehow found it anyway. And in that recognition, painful as it was, we finally found our way back to each other. Sometimes the people who fight hardest against our creative expression are the ones most deeply affected by it. My father didn't mock my singing because he thought it was bad. He feared it because it was powerful enough to reach the parts of himself he'd locked away. In finally embracing what my music could do, he found a path to his own healing. I still perform Silent Battles at every show, now understanding the full weight of its history, my grandmother's love, Lieutenant Thompson's sacrifice, my father's struggle, and the surprising way music connected all these stories across generations. When I sing it now, I do so with the knowledge that some battles are fought in silence, but their echoes can still be heard by those who know how to listen. Have you ever had a moment when something you created touched someone more deeply than you could have imagined? Or when you discovered an unexpected connection between your life and a family story from the past? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the most difficult relationships can be healed through understanding and honesty. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, our voices are powerful beyond what we know.